What were they thinking back then? Imagine going in for surgery today. The room is clean, tools are shiny, and your doctor cracks a joke before you drift off under anesthesia. It feels safe, right? Well, back in the Victorian era, surgery wasn't just dangerous, it was like a bloody sport. Surgery in the 1800s, think of it as a nightmare circus where your survival was basically a coin flip. Back then, only about 50% of surgeries ended well. Even if you lived through the surgery, the infection might get you later. Now let's dive into how bad it really was. Let's start with surgery today. If you need an operation now, there's a 98% chance you'll survive. You'll probably even post about it online afterward. But in the 1800s, just going into a hospital was like playing a deadly game. Why? Let me tell you about a couple of things. Dirty tools and bloody hands. That's right, doctors back then didn't care about germs. They didn't even know germs existed. And forget about anesthesia, you stayed wide awake. The best thing you could get was a drink of alcohol. Maybe someone gave you a rag to bite while you screamed, wondering why. They didn't know about germs. People thought sickness came from bad air, or what they called miasmas. This meant hospitals were dirty and doctors didn't bother cleaning between patients. Fun, right? And here's the crazy part. Doctors thought it was more important to be fast than careful. One of the most famous surgeons, Robert Liston, could cut off a leg in under 30 seconds. That's right, 30 seconds, but sometimes being fast didn't end well. Once, he accidentally killed 3 people in one surgery, his patient, his assistant, and someone watching the surgery. Talk about a really bad day, but hey, on the bright side, Liston actually washed his hands before surgery. That was a big deal back then, so you win some, you lose some, I guess. Let's talk about the doctors in the Victorian era. You might think they had clean, high-tech training. Nope. Back then, doctors learned by cutting up dead bodies that were stolen from graves. Sounds like a horror movie, right? In the 1800s, there weren't any programs where people donated their bodies to science. So, how did doctors get bodies to study? Grave robbers, called resurrection men, would dig up fresh corpses and sell them to hospitals and universities. And guess what? They didn't steal just any bodies. They often targeted the poor and people of color. Yeah, it was a terrible time. But here's the weird part. Students didn't just study these stolen bodies. They also used them for fun. Future doctors sometimes had sword fights using human arms and legs. Real sword fights with real limbs. That's some hands-on learning. So the next time you think your school is tough, remember this. At least no one is swinging a human leg around. Medicine back then wasn't for everyone, it was mostly for white men. Women and people of color had little chance to become doctors. If they were lucky, they could become nurses, but becoming a doctor, almost impossible. Here's an interesting fact. Dr. James Barry, a famous surgeon, was actually a trans man. He practiced in disguise. Talk about a surprising twist. And let's not forget about pioneers like James McCune Smith. He was the first black man to get a medical degree in America. These people broke barriers and changed medicine, even though the system was against them. Women didn't really get into the medical field until the late 1800s, and even then they were sometimes used to support colonialism, so their victories were a bit complicated. But hey, today anyone can become a doctor, as long as you can survive those student loans. All right, let's hit the fast forward button to when things started to get a bit less medieval. In the late Victorian era, doctors finally had an epiphany. Cleanliness might actually be a good idea. Shocking, right? Before this, hospitals were charmingly known as houses of death. You had better odds of surviving a duel than a hospital stay. The infection rates were through the roof. Things only started looking up when doctors discovered antiseptics and anesthesia. Here's a fun tidbit. Before ether and antiseptics, hospitals were so sketchy that people preferred DIY healthcare at home. Imagine choosing your messy house over a hospital because it was the safer bet. The first time ether was used in surgery, it was like a blockbuster premiere. It gave doctors the courage to play around with new procedures, but that newfound confidence was a double-edged scalpel. Some doctors got a bit too gung-ho and started performing riskier surgeries. This led to a few unfortunate outcomes. Suddenly, surviving surgery wasn't just about making it through the operation, it was about surviving the doctor's enthusiasm. It's like handing a kid a chainsaw and saying, "Go nuts." What could possibly go wrong? Now you're probably thinking, If germ theory was such a big deal, why didn't all doctors start washing their hands? Well, here's why. Doctors didn't like being told they were the problem. Surprised? For hundreds of years, people believed in the miasma theory. They thought diseases came from bad air, not germs, so doctors didn't see the point in washing their hands or cleaning their tools. They thought the air was making people sick, not the blood and pus on their equipment. Ignaz Semmelweis was the guy who figured out that hand washing could save lives. You'd think everyone would listen, right? Nope. Instead, people thought he was crazy. He was mocked, ignored, and eventually locked up in a mental institution, all for trying to stop infections. It's like the worst plot twist ever. Doctor suggests washing hands, gets locked up. Imagine if that happened today. Breaking news, Surgeon General says use soap, immediately thrown in a padded room. Here's a wild fact about Victorian surgery. People actually watch surgeries for entertainment. Yep, it was like their version of binge-watching a series. Want to see someone get their leg chopped off? Just grab a seat. These public surgeries were so popular that surgeons became like performers. Surgeons like Robert Liston would strut in and shout, "Time me," before starting. He wasn't just a doctor, he was a showman. Thankfully, this practice faded away with the advent of anesthesia and germ theory, but it left its mark. Even today, medical students still train in surgical theatres, though now it's all sterile and a lot less screen-filled. Can you imagine if that was still a thing today? Step right up. Watch Dr. Fast Fingers perform an amputation in under 2 minutes. Yeah, let's be thankful we've moved on. So that's Victorian surgery in a nutshell. It was a terrifying time, but it led to the medical advances we have today. If germ theory wasn't accepted, if anesthesia wasn't introduced, who knows where we'd be now. And the next time you're worried about a minor surgery, remember at least your doctor won't be cutting your arm off in front of an audience. Here's a fun fact to leave you with. Back in the day, doctors wore bloody aprons as a badge of honor. The more blood, the prouder they were. Today, clean hands, clean tools, and anesthesia. Isn't modern medicine wonderful? Thanks for watching. If you want more strange and wild history, don't forget to hit that like and subscribe button. Stay safe.